Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Club. This week's race C is a fuel-saving Group 4, and I'm happy to say, the Anti-Meta car is actually the very first car that I learned to fuel save in back in 2018. Let's get into it. Our Anti-Meta hero car of the week is the Jag F-Type. I actually have a sneaky suspicion that it's better than the Ferrari at both fuel-saving pace as well as just overall performance. It's really good. I was able to put it in the top 10 pretty easily, and my optimal would have put it in the world record, at least for yesterday. I don't know if anyone's got any faster or anything else, but even in the race it performs better, and I've been able to hit multiple 53s in race pace on the hards while fuel saving. Early on Tuesday morning, I was able to put this in 10th place overall, and it was actually the only F-Type in the top 100, which was pretty interesting. I think people just hadn't quite figured out a tune yet, but it's really good. It might even be faster than the Meta car, which would of course make it the Meta car, but I think people just don't realize it yet. My old teammate SV Super Chicken gave me a really nice bass tune, and then I tweaked just a few things. He also helped me figure out the corner entry oversteer, and yeah, I love this tune. Flying down the front straight, keep an eye out for where the grass ends because you're going to want to put your car all the way up onto the curbing. Putting your right tires all the way up on the curb, look for this flag light indicator and brake once you get all the way past it. I like to get down to 4th gear and then follow the tire marks to know when to turn in for the corner. I get down to 3rd gear once I get all the way on the pavement, and we're going to stay there as we trail brake, trying to make sure that we continue turning so we can get a late apex on this second left-hander right here. Continue turning left towards the center of the track, but start turning right before you get to the grass on the right. When you've turned enough that it feels like your car stops turning in, that's when we're going to lift off the throttle and turn in a little bit more. I like to upshift here so we get pure acceleration, and when I see that orange mark in the distance, that's when I try to get on full throttle, continuing to turn into the corner. When it feels like the car is steering nicely and you're not really on the limit of front grip, you can start unwinding the steering wheel so you're not creating any friction at the front, making sure that you can accelerate fully. Just like the first braking zone, you can have your tires all the way on the green as long as your right tires are still on the curb. Right before you get to the bridge, downshift to 4th, brake hard, and turn in just slightly. Once we get to 3rd gear, we want to start trail braking, and we want to hit the apex right before we can see this F here on the fence. Clearly I missed the apex just a little bit right here, but we want to get on the throttle before we get to that F. Continue turning in as we're exiting the corner, but make sure you don't turn in too much because you'll scrub your tires. That'll slow you down, and in the race, it'll also wear out your tires way too much. Follow the tire marks to the outside of the track, and I like to use where the tire marks go to the edge of the track to know when to brake, but there's also this nice concrete slab or whatever on the outside of the fence. Brake hard, downshift all the way to 3rd gear, then 2nd gear as you turn in. Once again, you can follow the tire marks for a really good point of reference. Let the car settle into the corner before getting on the throttle and be very careful. We want to go straight all the way to the edge of the track using as much of it as you possibly can. If you turn too much, you're likely to under or oversteer. Either way, you're going to end up in the sand. You don't need to hit the inside apex. All you need to do is line yourself up with this curbing, and you're going to brake when you get to the middle of the white part. Get down to 3rd gear and immediately trail brake in, but be very gentle because you can cause oversteer really easily. You're going to hit this curb what seems like is early, but you really just need to go barely onto the curb here, cutting almost a straight line all the way to set up for the next corner. For the next corner, we're going to look at the end of the curbing. We're going to try to follow the outside edge as it tapers in towards the corner. Gently lift off the throttle as you turn in, and you can look for this tire mark here, or you can look for the bump on the inside of the curbing here on the right. Your goal is to slow down just enough that you can apex right after that bump, and continue turning in as you get on the throttle and try to track all the way out onto the green concrete using just your right tires on the red and white. Your braking point for the next corner is going to be vastly different between time trial and the actual race itself, so I'm going to give you a few different points of reference. Firstly, the wall changes. Secondly, there's a flag light up on that post to the right. And third, these marks on the ground are where you brake for the time trial. Right before you get to the 50 meter board, we're going to turn in, downshift to 2nd gear, trail brake, downshift to 1st gear, then back up to 2nd gear and gently on the throttle, trying to track all the way out using as much of the curb as you can. You want to make that corner as wide as you possibly can. Late apex and abuse this curb as much as you can, once again using the tire marks on the ground to let us know when we turn in. Applying gentle braking pressure after we've already turned in, just to scrub off the speed, we continue adding steering as our speed slows. Very gently squeeze on the throttle, making sure we apex after that bump, and make sure you do not over or understeer here. You've got to be really careful with all of your inputs. One final time in the lap, we use the tire marks to turn in again. We're going to brake after we turn in, downshift to 2nd, and then tuck the car in just a little bit more, making sure we miss the high part of the curb, and then back on the throttle as we steer to the right side of the track. Aiming for the orange mark on the wall, right when we get under the metal structure, we're going to straighten out the wheel, brake, and then immediately trail brake in so we just barely brush the curb next to the orange part of the wall. Coming all the way off the brakes to balance the car over the first bump, you want to continue steering left until you get to the point where you can turn in and just barely miss that curb, making sure your left tires stay over the white line. Hitting that perfect line means you don't have to wait to get on the throttle and you can stay fully on the throttle as you exit the final corner. Shift like normal and continue to steer in so you don't go all the way off the track into the sand. There are a lot of parts of this track where I'm asking you to go almost all the way off the track, just barely using the curbs, and that can cause the car to slide. And the tune that I have also makes the car slide a little bit on corner entry, but oversteer on entry is okay as long as it doesn't get crazy and you can catch it with the throttle. Your instincts are probably going to tell you to get on the throttle a little bit too early here and probably steer too much, but make sure you're listening to the tires. If they're squealing too much, turn less, not more. You may notice that I have to counter steer a little bit on this corner entry. I should have tried to rotate the car a little bit more because as long as you don't slide out, like I've been saying, it's going to be faster. If you can get just a tiny bit of rotation, just a little bit of a slide just around the center of the car, then it's going to make it much easier to get on the throttle for the exit. The last braking point is a really good example of how a lot of the braking points in this track are kind of vague. As long as you're actively looking for multiple reference points, eventually it's going to become instinct for you to know where you are on track, and you're not going to need to know exactly where you are to know when to brake and turn in. This corner is kind of unique because you need to slow down in the middle of it rather than the entry. You don't want to brake hard then turn in, you want to start turning in, gradually scrub off speed, and then use the brakes just to tuck the nose in for the exit. For this hairpin, you're going to brake a lot earlier for the actual race because you're going to be on different tires. Your car's going to weigh more because of the fuel, and you may or may not have slipstream, so just be really careful there. This corner is also another corner where you want to turn in, gradually slow down, and then use the brakes just to tuck the nose in. And the name of the game for this final part is just patience. You've got to wait a long time and position your car perfectly, including where you have the weight of the car, to make sure you can go over the bumps just perfectly. If you try to speed your way through there, if you try to brute force it, it's not going to work. Be really gentle and just treat it like a dance. This is a really difficult track, so good luck. You got this. All right, let's talk strategy. First and foremost, they give you the option of using soft tires, but they're not required. Hards are, however, required, which means that if you use the softs, you're going to have to stop, and a pit stop actually costs something like 37 seconds if you fuel up. It is completely not worth it. It is nearly 30 seconds faster just to save fuel and stay on hards. If you've watched my series before, you've probably seen me talk about how to save fuel, so we're going to talk about it one more time. As you can see, I'm using the fuel map to be in fuel map 6 at the beginning. This can save you up to 1% of fuel, which can really make a difference at the end of this race because you really need to save fuel. I also want to point out that I'm using +5 on the brake balance to make sure we take care of those front tires because even though it's hard, the front tires do get worn down a lot. So be very careful with them. Try not to steer too much, and just do your best not to slide. For this car, you can use the rev bar that's right in the center of the screen, and when it just barely lights up, when the revs just start barely counting, then you can shift and you'll be totally fine. I use a big combination of kind of changing where I shift based on the circumstances. For instance, if I'm really close to someone, I'm going to shift a lot earlier because I can keep up the momentum being in slipstream without having to use too much fuel. You can also lift and coast, meaning that when you're following behind someone, you can keep up the momentum because of the slipstream and lift off the throttle entirely, but let the momentum carry you into the corner. We'll come back to fuel saving in a minute, but strategy-wise, for this corner specifically, especially at the beginning of the race, if there is a lot of traffic, everyone's going to dive for the apex and they're going to be slowing each other down a lot. As you can see, if you just take the outside, you can usually get a position or two. And with that said, I made a huge mistake here. I caused a collision. I feel really bad. This was 100% on me, but I should have braked a lot earlier. I braked slightly early, but it wasn't enough, and I don't think that guy saw me whatsoever, but luckily, it didn't cause any damage. No one went off track. We pretty much stayed on our line, so I just continued battling, and he didn't seem too upset about it. You can tell from that corner, too, that he overslowed down, and I usually expect people to dive really deeply into that hairpin. He did not. He slowed down. He was really careful, and because of it, I accidentally caused an accident. So I'm sorry, Risto Bill. Didn't mean to do that. Didn't want to cause that, but I don't think it really ruined either of our races, so that's why I continued. Back to fuel. I like to take any opportunity I can to make sure I'm saving fuel. So if I'm behind someone, if I have slipstream, I'm going to shift earlier. If it's an extreme case, I might also use a fuel map, but for this race, I didn't use that at all. My favorite bit of strategy, like I talk about all the time, is paying really close attention to how people are driving, and I noticed that Lanterne Rouge was slowing down a little bit early for corners in the last race, so I knew that if I wanted the outside, I could keep up more momentum and pull off a pass there. Despite having a really bad line coming out of there, I was able to miss that bump, which meant that I could get on the throttle really early, and then I was still in T-bait slipstream, so I kept up my momentum. Now, again, talking about short shifting, I'm using a little bit more fuel because I'm not that close to T-baits and I want to make sure that I can get away from Rouge. So in this situation, I also noticed that I had exactly enough fuel. If you look down at the percentage rather than the remaining laps, you can see that obviously we only need 10% fuel per lap. And as the race goes, the car is going to become more fuel efficient because it's actually going to weigh less because of the fuel that you're using. So if you're right about 90% after the first lap, you're totally fine. It's also a really good idea to know exactly how much fuel you use when you're going all out, so if you're ever in a really good position in a race, or if you're in a position where you can't really do any better or worse, it would be worth experimenting how much fuel you would need to go all out 100% throttle throughout the entire thing, just in case you're able to save enough and you want to get a really fast lap, or have that surplus so you can defend against people who might be doing the same. Once again, we'll come back to that, but I love this corner. A lot of people immediately track out after passing this, and if you get a much better run, you can actually go on the inside, and believe it or not, we don't make any contact through this. So cheers to Bates, he was really clean, and I was really glad that I was able to pull off that move. That one felt really special. As you can imagine, any kind of battling is going to wear out the tires as well as make you use too much fuel, so make any kind of defense or offense really decisive. Be as tricky as you can and be, like I said, just be really decisive. I moved all the way to the inside, so he knew without a doubt that I was going to defend, so he was going to have to pull off a really big move in order to make anything happen. I was able to successfully defend against him there. If you find yourself against a much faster opponent, you can actually still get the edge against them if you can stick with them. It's worth using a little bit extra fuel in a section that you might not be very good at if you can get behind them and really close behind them going onto a straight. If you can get really close to the bumper of a car that's going faster than you, you can then start short shifting a lot earlier. You can use the fuel map to keep up the same momentum while using a lot less fuel, and you can even lift and coast going into corners to save extra fuel. So if you have a bigger surplus than that person at the end of the race, you can then pass someone using more power than technique. Just another thing to think about when it comes to fuel saving strategies. It took us nearly 2.5 laps to catch anyone, and at that point, our friend Crabster had left the race, unfortunately. Sorry, Crabs, it was fun racing with you, even though it was temporary. And this Wade guy, I don't think he was really trying to be dirty, but he did steer towards me right at the edge of that corner, pushing me off and making me get a much worse entrance into that corner. But then he didn't push me wide or anything. However, again, he made a mistake, completely missed the apex, ran directly into me, but he gave me space here again. It's really important to take note of these situations. He's pushed me off the track nearly, and he's run directly into me, into a braking zone. But he's also giving me space and trusting that I won't push him off the track. A guy like this is probably just making little mistakes because when you're going this fast, a little mistake can have a big consequence, like when he hit me. But everything else points to him being really clean. So I'm just saying that you should probably give people a little bit more patience, especially if they just bump you once or twice. And people might just be struggling with the technique and struggling to stay clean. I don't think he was trying to be dirty whatsoever. Anyways, that was a rant. We now have 3 people ahead, and for all I knew, all of them were just saving on hard tires, so I figured I needed to continue saving, do what I could to position myself so I could pick them off one by one. I catch up to them pretty quickly, just a few corners really, but what happens after this corner gives you another thing to really think about. We know that pace-wise, I'm faster than them since I caught all the way up to them from the back, and of course I closed in on them on a couple corners. But then we get to this straight. Even though I got a better exit, I'm not catching up with him at all. He's got slipstream ahead, but I also have slipstream on him. So why am I not catching him? He's using more fuel. Now that's a really common pitfall in these races. When you can trick someone into using more fuel, they're going to either not realize or they're going to realize sometime later that they need to stop using fuel, and then you're going to be able to put on a really good attack. Let's say he's only using maybe 1% more fuel than he needs to trying to defend against you on that straight. You can then respond to that by using 1% less, shifting early and just making sure you stay within his slipstream. So the discrepancy between the amount of fuel that you have is much more in your favor. Crossing the line, we see that I have a 2% surplus, and that means I can use a lot of fuel right now trying to get ahead of him. It didn't actually take very much extra at all, and I also knew that since my pace was better, I'd be able to outbrake him, and so that was third place down. It's really dangerous when you're in between a car that you just passed and the next car that they've been trying to chase, because people really don't like losing positions, and the best time to get their position back is directly after losing it. So you've got to pay a lot of attention, make sure that they're not going to try to take it back from you, because if you keep switching places, you're just going to lose pace, you're going to use too much fuel, and then the person ahead is going to get really far away from you. Luckily, I didn't have to really worry about that, so I just kept pressing on towards Nico Kara. Now, I made a mistake and caused a collision earlier. I definitely made another bit of a mistake against Nico. It was less egregious this time in my opinion, and to be quite honest, I'm just going to be 100% frank. Nico Kara pushed me completely off track while I was streaming the other day, and so I was still pretty upset about that. When I talked earlier about making a decisive move, one big thing I like to do is pretend like I'm not going to make a pass until the very last second and then quickly position myself so that they don't have time to react. Now, this is going to look like a dive bomb because, honestly, it is. Like I said, I was already mad at Nico Kara, so I wasn't too upset about it. But what I did do is make sure I hit the apex, and I also gave him space. I actually think that he thought I was going to go quicker, and so I think he was just trying to follow me through and turned in just a little bit early, and it wasn't that much of an impact. But again, I'm not really proud of that first pass on the white Ferrari. I'm not super proud of the pass on Nico Kara, whereas I'm really sorry to the white Ferrari. I'm not exactly sorry to Nico Kara because, again, dude pushed me entirely off the track just so he wouldn't lose. And I'm petty. Anyways, back to the race. Like I think I mentioned before, Night 7 actually forgot to put on the right tire, so he takes a pit stop, and this race was almost pretty much locked in. Since that's the case, I actually want to show you another race that I did. It was kind of uneventful, and because of that, I was able just to work on my pace, so I just want to show you what this car is capable of. In this race that I had done just before on the American side, I had such an easy time getting through traffic that I was actually in first place by the beginning of lap 5. So I was able to really just focus on getting the best out of the car, getting the most out of the car, getting the best pace that I could essentially. And so I was pretty proud of the laps that I was hitting. So if you look over to the right, you can see that after I got in first place, I hit a mid 54, then I was down to the low 54s, eventually almost a 53, and then at the end of this lap, I even had a surplus at the start of the final lap, and we hit my first 53.8. I think this car is probably actually capable of a 53.6, 53.7 while still saving fuel, and if you save up a lot of fuel, you can probably get a low 53. This car is really incredible, and I actually do think it's superior to the Ferrari. Thank you again for watching my video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked what you saw, and of course, I'll be making another one of these guys every week. Thank you.